Hello, this is Manisha Thakur. Welcome to the Money Zen podcast, where I strive to bring you information and inspiration to help you create the financial life that makes your heart sing. Having worked in the financial services industry for nearly 24 years now, I have seen over and over how many smart, hardworking, well-intentioned individuals find themselves confused, overwhelmed, and frustrated about their relationship with money. As such, this podcast series is rooted in my belief that we don't need more financial information. What we need is more financial wisdom. What we need is clear, unbiased guidance to help us take the optimal actions with our money to achieve our unique, authentic life goals. This Money Zen podcast is designed to help you receive and achieve exactly that. In each episode, I will be interviewing a different industry expert so that collectively, over time, as you listen to the various short 20 to 30-minute Money Zen podcasts, you'll have a series of audio reference materials that you can use to educate yourself around money and increase your level of financial calm and confidence. Some of the topics we will cover will be obvious choices for a financial podcast. Topics such as budgeting, investing, and retirement planning. Other topics may surprise you as we delve into some of the logistical, societal, and psychological reasons why money remains in many ways one of the last taboos of polite conversation. Taken together, it is my hope that this collection of recordings will help you craft your path to your own definition of Money Zen. So without further ado, let's get on to today's episode. Today's guest, Stuart Vic Smith, is the author of Finding Your Financial Path, a guide for women through life's twists and turns. A partner at Austin, Texas-based advisory firm ML&R Wealth Management, Stuart focuses her practice on women and wealth. Stuart's my favorite kind of advisor, as she serves her clients as a holistic planner instead of just an investment advisor. In her 10 years at ML&R, Stuart has developed a reputation for working with her clients on a deeply personal level, allowing them to develop an authentic plan to support their long-term dreams for themselves and their families. Stuart has been recognized in her industry as a leader and has been asked to speak at national events on the topic of women and wealth. Stuart also regularly appears on Austin's KVUE News to discuss personal finance topics. When not spending time helping women create their own path to financial freedom, Stuart enjoys spending time with her husband, 2 kids, and 2 rescue dogs. Welcome, Stuart.
Thanks, Manisha.
So you start off your wonderful book, Finding Your Financial Path, a guide for women through life's twists and turns, by highlighting the shift of wealth to women, which is a huge positive, and yet also the investment gap, which to date has hurt women. Can you share highlights of these 2 competing trends with listeners?
Yeah, it's really an interesting dynamic because as we are seeing and will see in the coming decades that there's a huge shift of wealth in the United States, whether it's from baby boomers the men are dying and leaving their family wealth to their spouses, or whether it's younger professional women who are building their own portfolios before they marry. There is this tsunami of wealth that's being transferred from men to women in the United States, and we have to be ready for that. The difference is that throughout time, just like personalities, investing personalities are different for men and women tend to invest a little differently. Part of the investment gap has been built up because of the wage gap. Lower earning wages creates lower savings for women, less time in the workforce due to families, but also this idea of women tend to take lower risk in their portfolios, which means they don't grow as much over the long term. Both of those together are kind of an interesting dynamic, and how do we balance those going forward?
You know, I love that you start off highlighting those twin conundrums, because I feel like the earlier we can help women address that investment gap as an industry, the more meaningful the long-term impact we can have on their lives. And yet at the same time, it's also never too late to start addressing that investment gap. So I thank you for bringing that up. And I also love that you get right into love and money early on in your book. What are your thoughts on whether couples should have joint or separate bank accounts? And what do you think of prenups?
So I think what really needs to happen for couples is you have to do what's right for you. You have to figure out what works, whether it's having a joint account for household finances and separate accounts for discretionary spending. That may work. What I also see is millennials and Generation X women who are creating their wealth before they get married. They're keeping their assets separate. So really what you have to figure out is what works for you as a couple, but also the most important thing is communication. Because however you have to set it up, at the end of the day, it has to work for you. And like I'm saying with wealth related to this younger generation, I think prenups are things people should consider. Whether you're going to marry for the first time or the second time, if you have assets or if you have children, you should consider where that money would go in the event that you were to die. Also, I think women who go into a marriage and may be giving up their earning years by staying home with children certainly need to have some sense of safety through a prenup maybe lined up to protect them in the event that they don't have that savings and they end up divorcing down the road. Both ways, you need something to protect you at the end of the day.
It's so interesting because marriage for so long, for most of recorded history, was essentially an economic contract. You got married because my cow went with your goats, or, we had adjoining lands. And the concept of romantic love is in the history of the world, a fairly new one, and kind of figuring out how to blend the two together, especially as you rightly point out on either end of the spectrum, whether you are choosing to stay at home and perhaps giving up some economic earning years, or you're coming in with a complex prior situation. There are just so many different permutations that didn't exist 50, 75 years ago. And so this is a really modern problem and it needs a modern solution. At the risk of sounding like a bit of a Debbie Downer, divorce is a reality for so many people these days, myself included. What advice do you have for a woman who may be contemplating or in the process of getting divorced?
So like you said, it's hard. You obviously go into marriage not thinking that's where you're going to end up. But if you are headed that direction, you need to think about where you are right now and where you will be after the divorce. You need to think about what your savings looks like, what your portfolio looks like, what your assets are. How will those be separated? And what does that mean long term for spending for you and for budgeting for you? Really, before you kind of go down that road, you need to get organized and understand the implications of a new life and what that means for you. Go in with your eyes open and really be thoughtful of how you want it to fall out throughout the process, and know that at the end of the day, you will land on your own 2 feet and you will be great, but you just have to be educated and understand before you get there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on a more upbeat note, women are starting businesses at unprecedented rates. What financial tips do you suggest women entrepreneurs and business owners keep in mind?
I love women entrepreneurs. I think women are driven and passionate, and they're great at starting businesses and making them successful, but be thoughtful about it. Going into that new venture, make sure to make a plan about what it looks like. How much money of your own do you need to or can afford to invest? If you have the ability, continue to save on the side, because what you don't want to do is put everything that you have into that new venture and risk losing it all. So set up that plan and be disciplined, because if you get to a point down the road and you know it's not working out, make sure that you have the right time to exit so that you don't harm yourself down the road. But celebrate. It's an exciting time and it's a great opportunity. Just make sure that you take care of yourself along the way.
As I'm thinking about this topic, I feel like I meet so many women who are starting businesses. And I saw an interesting stat the other day that 40% of U.S. businesses are owned by women. And collectively, if you added them together, the revenues would reflect the fifth largest GDP in the nation, like larger than France, larger than the UK. But I also feel like there's a little bit of an underbelly too, in that a lot of businesses, not just women-owned businesses, but a lot of businesses aren't profitable. And so your point about making sure that you protect yourself and you're not plowing everything into the business is huge. And as an advisor, do you welcome conversations? I think a lot of people feel like, well, I should talk to my advisor about the assets that I have to invest. When you're dealing with female entrepreneurs, do you welcome questions about how they should be allocating their money between what to put in the business and what to put aside for the future?
Definitely. You know, the way I see it is you have a core portfolio that you're building that you need to have in place to support yourself through retirement. If you need to take a portion of that, or if you have a portion of that that is excess, then that is really what you want to look at related to investing in a new venture. But be careful, like we said, not to take too much off the table so that you risk your long-term sustainability. You know, it's an undiversified investment, and so you want to make sure that you're not putting too much into it so it's overweighted. But be thoughtful, have the conversation with your advisor. It's an important step in making sure you go about it the right way.
You highlight a key reason people save for the future is to have the possibility of being able to retire one day. You have some very interesting holistic advice on this topic in your book, advice that I don't typically see related to this subject. Can you share with readers what you think are the key things to think about when contemplating retirement?
Yeah, I love talking about retirement because it's always the end goal, but people tend to think, or used to think, retirement was you walked in one day and you stopped working and you were done. But that's not reality anymore. We want to stay engaged. We need that intellectual stimulation, that social interaction, and I really recommend phasing into retirement. I think people can kind of get out of that job that is high pressure and high earning where they have to save a lot and move into something that they love. And maybe it's that you're working part-time or you're in a lower stress career, but whatever it may be, it creates a happier work-life balance for you where you're also taking away the pressure to save. Enjoy some of that time, stay active, stay engaged, but have the daily schedule and the purpose in life that you can get up and go somewhere and find something that you love. The benefit of this is it reduces the draw on your portfolio because you're earning a little bit of money, maybe not as much as you earned kind of pre that phase in of retirement, but it's taking some of that pressure off the portfolio to pull 100% of your living needs every day. So it's a great way to think about moving into retirement.
You know, and I am always fascinated when I look at Monte Carlos at the impact of simply having, you know, a $50,000 or $75,000 less draw on the portfolio because you're having this, what I'll call, for lack of a better term, retirement career and this extra income coming in, or an extra $100,000 or whatever the number is. But I think many people are surprised. They think like, oh, what difference could that bit of income make? But mathematically, especially, you know, if you can extend that time frame that you're not drawing down on that portfolio by an extra 5, 10, 15 years, it's massive. I think people can be quite surprised. And one of the things that I love about the way we work in the BAM Alliance is that the Monte Carlo tools that we use really can help show people mathematically that the left brain power of what we're talking about here. Speaking of stats and numbers, there's a stat I encountered probably a decade ago that just shocked me. And it's that 80% of men die married and 80% of women die single. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, like, are we killing them off? Like, what's going on here? But it's interesting, you know, since seeing this stat, you can see that it's true and it's due primarily to women's longer lifespans. So what advice do you have for widows, many of whom may be dealing with their finances in a meaningful way for the very first time?
Yeah, you know, it's amazing the number of women that I see in this situation. It's never expected. It's always a hard transition because a lot of the times it's the first time they have actually stepped into the financial kind of leader of the family unit. Not because they weren't capable, just because of separation of duties. Men have traditionally in the past tended to own those responsibilities. So coming in as a widow, one, you're dealing with the grief of your husband that you have lost, plus you're trying to take on something that you may not have either much understanding or education in, and it's a whole new confusing world. I really recommend, first of all, letting yourself understand and know that you can do it. You have the ability and you will make it, and there is no question about that. But along the way, give yourself some time to grieve and then to understand and then find some support. So whether it's a close friend or a trusted advisor that can step in and kind of guide you along the way, what you really want to do is get organized and realize, okay, what do I have now? What are my responsibilities going to be in the future? And how is my life going to change now that I'm in this different situation? Build that new plan and take your time to kind of get your feet on the ground related to handling the finances. One of the things I see a lot is it's such an overwhelming process that widows tend to want to jump in and make decisions right away that are really large and have major impact. But take a step and give yourself a year or two. Unless you really have to make a very quick decision about something major financially, give your time to really understand the lay of the land, get comfortable, and move forward, and you will be great. I know that you can make it work.
I think that's such smart advice about not feeling like there's some urgent time pressure in general to make financial decisions. I know when I got divorced, I was so surprised. I'd heard about divorce brain, and I thought, well, that's not going to happen to me. I've spent my entire life in financial services. But it really does. I mean, the emotions just kind of cloud. It's like a cloudy lens over your brain. And if you can avoid making key financial decisions while you're in that state, over the long run, it's really time well spent, even though you may feel like, well, I'm not doing anything. You actually are. You're giving yourself a chance to make future decisions with a clearer head. So I love that you brought that up. And you also touched on something else that, it comes out, these situations often tend to come up out of the blue. And yet, as the old adage says, the only thing that's certain is taxes and death. And so what about legacy planning in general? What should the savvy woman be thinking about on the estate planning and the legacy front?
Yeah, because like you said, you never know what's going to happen. And it's one thing we're sure of, it will at some point. If you have assets or if you have children, I always say you should have a will. You want to make it easy for those coming behind you to take care of what's important to you. You need to make sure that you set up the will, your estate, what you wanted to do going forward in a way that accomplishes your goals and desires. If you are in a second marriage and you have wealth and children from a first marriage, you probably should have that designated in a will specifically if you want the money to go to your children. So there are a lot of complications when it comes to passing of assets. But again, one of the things you probably should do is just make a list of the things that are important to you and where you want them to go, whether it's families, whether it's charity, whether it's a spouse. Having that lined up and really easy for somebody to understand and take your goals and dreams to the next level makes it better for everybody. If you have young children, set up trust. If you have older children that you want to protect from potentially divorce or credit situations, you can set up trust for assets to transfer to them as well. And one thing I like to talk to my clients about is if you have more money than you will ever spend or more money than you probably should hold for estate tax purposes, think about doing lifetime gifts. It may be a time in the life for your children where they need it more now than in 20 years, and it may be an opportunity for you to see them enjoy it. Certainly not if you can't afford to do it, but if you can and it helps on the estate tax side, it's a nice thing to consider.
And I love the way you framed it about making it easy for those coming behind you. I know post my divorce, I needed to revisit all of my documents, and I just didn't want to do it. And I didn't want to. And the thing that really helped me get the mojo going to address it was exactly what you said. It's not fun to contemplate your own passing, and it's certainly not fun if you're updating your documents due to a life change that was unanticipated or unwelcome. But when you frame it as helping the people you love and care about have an easier time dealing with your passing, I don't know, somehow it just, at least for me, it made it so much simpler. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And while we're speaking about wealth transfer, a huge trend going forward is going to be this massive intergenerational wealth transfer, with some estimates as much as $40 trillion changing hands between now and 2055, with much of that ending up in the hands of women. What are some considerations that listeners should keep in mind about inherited wealth?
Yeah, inherited wealth is really hard because you're balancing this benefit of kind of a new opportunity with the loss of a loved one. And there sometimes is guilt associated with it. There's sometimes this kind of frozen, I can't do anything different because this is what they did with the money. What you need to think about and what you want to do is realize that this loved one passed this money on to you for your new life, to give you an opportunity that you may not have had. It was important to them. And so now is your time to revisit where you stand. Does this money give you an opportunity to go back to school, or to retire early, or to educate your children in a way that you weren't able to before? Revisit your kind of financial plan and your life and think about what you want this money to do for you and for your family, and remove the guilt from it. What I see a lot is portfolios that come to family members, they don't want to reinvest the money because, oh, well, you know, my uncle had this portfolio in this stock and thought about it, and this is how he set it up, so I need to carry on that legacy. This money is now for you, and you have to diversify it and invest it in your portfolio that fits your needs. Don't be locked in to what worked for your uncle or your grandmother or whatever it may be, because you are in a different place now than where they were. You know, consider gifting to family members or charity if you have more than you will need. I mean, if this has built you a nest egg beyond your wildest dreams, then share some of that either with things that are important to you or things that were important to your loved one. This just opens up a lot of doors, and make sure that you do it for you and not because you feel guilty to do it for somebody else.
I love that. And I can remember early on in my career, I lived in Texas, and so many people would inherit stock and oil companies. And it's exactly as you described, this almost feeling like an obligation of a need to continue the investment legacy of the person who passed the money on, and yet oftentimes having this incredibly concentrated and volatile commodity position. And so I think it's so wise that you're framing it this way, and highlighting the transition is also a good time to transition the investment into what makes sense for the next leg. And in a sense, that's kind of a money myth, that holding on to an inherited asset is in some way honoring someone. You talk about some other money myths in your book. What are some that you'd like to highlight here for listeners?
You know, there are a couple that I really think are important because we tend to see them over and over. And I think the first is home ownership is the best investment you can make. And while we're Americans and we love the idea of owning our own home, it may not be the right fit for you, the right time for you, or maybe even the right amount of money for you. Don't feel like this American dream of buying a home is the end-all be-all, and if you put all your money into this house, this is going to be your portfolio in the future, because, you know, a house is an illiquid asset. You don't have the ability to sell off a room. It's not easily transferable. You can't sell it at a moment's notice if you need money. So think of it as a place to live and not your long-term portfolio. Beyond that, I also see people saving for college above their own retirement. And we love our children and we want to do everything there is for them. But at the end of the day, you can't borrow money in retirement, and you can borrow money to put your kids through school. So you really need to balance that idea of supporting yourself in your golden years and kind of getting your kids off to the right track in life. And you know, they're both wonderful, but don't put your future at risk for paying for your kid to go to Harvard when that may not be the right option. And then finally, I think this is what we all need to think about is money doesn't buy happiness. Keeping up with the Joneses and buying a bigger house or a fancy car or whatever it may be, we see it and we think that's what we should be doing. But happiness comes through time with family and experiences, and let go of the material piece of money and enjoy the people you love in your life as opposed to trying to spend more to keep up with everybody else. So, there's a lot of them out there, but those are my three favorites that I just think people need to think about.
I love all of them, but I extra love this last point about what does and doesn't buy happiness. I think, I'm on this tear talking about, I call it joy-based spending, but I am just amazed at how many times I see a disconnect between where people's money is going and where they're getting the most joy in their lives. And when you can align the two, like that to me is the financial planning sweet spot. And it's also just the life enjoyment sweet spot. And I feel like the earlier people can hear this message in their lives, the more powerful. So for anyone listening, I just feel like this is a huge one to pass on to kids. And so yeah, let's end by talking about that. How to pay it forward. You also have some wonderful ideas in the book about teaching kids about money. What are a few of your top tips here?
Well, the one I love the most is we need to teach our children the three principles of money, which are spending, saving, and sharing. And a dollar earned can go three different directions as opposed to a dollar earned should be spent the moment you have it. I mean, think about what's important in your life. Give yourself the reward of buying something now. Be thoughtful about your future and save some of it for down the road and share with those who maybe are not as fortunate as you are or for something that you're passionate about. And if you can build that into that day-to-day value of a dollar, it really creates a long-term financial future for your children. So I think starting to do that and show them that with their allowance, with the money they may be getting from birthdays or whatever it may be, it's a great way to kind of give them the experience of what money means. The other things I really think about in our society, money kind of tends to be taboo. And take the taboo off the table. Talk about money at dinner with your children, whether it's when they're 5 or whether it's when they're 20. My kids are 17 and 15, and we talk about what it means to make choices around money and taking a trip or saving for education or buying something new. All of those are choices that we have to make. And if we can show them what our thought process is and what it means to us, it gives them learning experiences along the way so they don't jump in at a situation down the road without kind of learning from others as they go. So I like talking about money, sharing whatever information I have and experiences I have, good and bad, and hopefully my kids will do the same and teach their children the same way, and we'll all have a greater conversation when it comes to money and taking the taboo away.
Well, here. And Stuart, thank you so much for sharing your time to talk to us about money here today. And again, Stuart's book is Finding Your Financial Path, a guide for women through life's twists and turns. Stuart, if readers want to find out more about you, find out more about the book, is there a website they can turn to?
Yes, please visit my website. It's stuartvicsmith.com. You will have the ability to download the book or I'm happy to send you a hard copy in the mail if you would like. It gives you more information on me and what I've done and information around the book.
Well, and I highly encourage listeners to do this. I love Stuart's book because it was super clear, super concise, really digestible. And I just want to highlight Stuart is spelled Stuart, Vic, V-I-C-K, Smith, SMITH.com, and just go there, check it out. So Stuart, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really wonderful, and here's wishing you smooth navigating as you head forward through life's twists and turns.
Thanks, Manisha. This was wonderful. I've enjoyed the time to talk with you.
And that's it for this episode of the Money Zen podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like more information or to stay connected with me, simply go to moneyzen.com, where you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, in which I share tips and tidbits to help you continue your financial journey. And on my website, moneyzen.com, you can also connect with me via social media. If you found the information in today's podcast helpful, I'd also like to encourage you to pay it forward and share this episode right now with another woman in your life. She could be your sister, your mother, your daughter, your friend, or a mentee. By sharing a link to this podcast via email or on Facebook, Twitter, or Pinterest right now, you can be part of the catalyst for helping women across the globe own our finances and own our lives. Never in the history of the world have women in aggregate been able to have the level of control around our finances as we do today. Concurrently, we appear to be at a very unique time in the history of the world. As I tape these episodes across the globe, there's anger, hurt, divisiveness, and outrage around so many subjects. By helping yourself and the women around you stand on your own two financial feet, you are putting yourself in a stronger position to make whatever impact you feel you can to shift this negative energy to the positive. So thank you for listening, thank you for sharing, and here's to your Money Zen.